are about to get started. As we do, I am excited to have all of you here with us. I just wanted to go over quickly to avoid background noise, and I know that you've been in many meetings over the last few months, so you're familiar with this. Please make sure that you do mute yourself at all times, unless we're in the breakout rooms, in which case we're going to allow you to unmute yourself so that you can speak. And it looks like everyone so far has joined using the microphone or dial-out option, so that's fantastic. As we get started, make sure to download the files, one of the two files that you see in the Files pod at the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. It's the same document, one's 508 compliant, one's not, and that will allow you to participate fully in today's session. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ruth to get us started.
Okay, hi everyone. I just wanted to say a quick welcome. Thank you for joining us for Back to Basics, Foundations of the NRS webinar. We are recording it, so it'll be available on the NRS web. And I'm going to turn it over to Larry to do our official welcome.
Hello, everybody, and thank you, Ruth. And again, thank you for joining us. We have a very big group today of over 100 people, and people are still joining us, so appreciate all of that. I will be presenting today with Ruth and Marcella, which you've already heard speak. They'll be doing the breakouts and the activities. We also have at least 3 people here from Octane. I saw on the list Jay Lemaster, Alan Tucker, and Sarah Yeager. I don't know if you guys want to say anything or type in the chat bar or anything, or unmute your phone and say hello. If not, that's fine. Just know they are here to support us and answer any questions we might have for them. Today I just wanted to give a little bit overview of what this is all about. As we said, it's NRS Back to Basics. And the idea behind this is to give you in the States a resource to use for both training new staff that may come in, and we know there's a lot of frequent turnover of staff, so new people that need to come in and learn about the NRS and WIOA accountability requirements. And it's also just a good as a refresher course when you forget things and need an update on it, or you may have forgotten a few of the key features and you want to check your understanding. And so these resources, as Ruth said, will be on our website. The webinar is recorded, and the material packet that we have available for you that can use for training is also going to be there. So in addition, there's some other resources about NRS Basics that I'll talk about at the end of the session. Okay, so what we're going to do then is review the performance indicators. Also, just some a general brief overview of accountability under WIOA and how it relates to WIOA's goals for adult education. We'll talk about, as I said, the indicators, data collection and reporting, and some of the key terms. And they'll also demonstrate how to use the professional development packet that's available to you. So we'll have you practice that and work in some groups. And you may have some questions, so rather than stop the flow and perhaps make us run out of time, I'll request that you keep them to the end or type them in the chat box as you think of them, and then we'll try to address them in the at the end of the session, the last 5 or 10 minutes we have for discussion. And if if you run out of time, I will answer your question offline through email or posting it on the NRS website. Okay, so I guess we're ready to go then, Ruth?
Yep, great. So Larry mentioned a couple of these things, but I'm just going to cover a few things again. We really want it to be an interactive webinar for everybody, so that in addition to hearing the content that we've prepared and we'll be sharing, we want you to exchange your knowledge and experiences and ideas with one another. So the way that we would like you to engage today is, as Larry said, to submit questions in the chat pod or the chat space, chat box. We will also be having question-specific chat pods that will come up. You'll see them about a moment after you see the questions on the slide itself. As Larry mentioned, we'll be doing a group activity in which you'll be split into small groups that you'll be randomly assigned to and transferred into the room, so you don't have to do anything, but just once you get there, have a great discussion. And we'll be referring to the activity packet that Larry mentioned, and you'll find that, as Marcel said a bit earlier, in the file section on your screen, there's a Word version and a 508 client version. And we also just ask that at the end of the session, you fill out an evaluation form because we appreciate your feedback. Okay. So to help you fulfill the requirements of WIOA and NRS, today we're going to explain the role of accountability in WIOA. We're going to review the basic terms, review indicators of performance, data collection issues around assessment and follow-up, and we also want to know what your specific needs are around technical assistance so that the NRS project team can address them with resources and guidance and trainings that will be helpful to you. And in the next couple of slides, I'm going to describe the activity packet view. So this is just the first page of the packet. Go ahead. Okay, and in the packet, there are 4 activities, and we'll be referring to them and showing you a couple sample questions from the activities. And the purpose of the packet is to increase staff understanding of the key principles and requirements of WIOA and NRS reporting, and to explore the concepts and strategies for how to collect and record performance data successfully. So the idea is to use this packet with local program staff. The first activity is Back to Basics, and this provides multiple choice, short answer, and discussion questions about general concepts and performance related to WIOA and NRS. The next one is Let's Talk Strategy, and this activity is a series of prompts about data collection strategies to use to engage staff from within programs and also across programs in thinking about what they're currently doing and how they might make improvements. Keeping records complete is a checklist of the steps and procedures for comprehensive records and reporting that can be used for local staff to make sure they're collecting all the necessary information. And this one in this packet is more comprehensive than the checklist we provided in the past. So I recommend that you use this one. And then what do the numbers mean is an activity where we've provided sample data so staff get to practice how to calculate post-exit indicators, and there are analysis questions about what the numbers are saying about program data practices, and for the participants to think from a state director's perspective about what program directors could be doing to improve performance. And also, just so you know, the packet has an entire answer key section as well. So whoever's doing the professional development does not need to know every single answer because that information is provided for you as well. So we'll be doing, as was mentioned before, going through the content sections, and then we'll have full group discussions on accountability, the key terms, data collection, and reporting issues. And then we'll have an activity where we break out into groups to discuss strategies and resources for data challenges. Then, as Larry mentioned, we'll have question and answer and wrap up. And so now I'll turn it over to Larry to get us into it.
Thank you very much, Ruth. I'm going to start off with just a very brief review of WIOA and accountability and how the accountability system is tied to WIOA's goals. I think this is useful to know, I guess, for a new staff especially, and new people new to adult ed, or may not know much about the accountability system, to see how it all fits together. So I'm just going to do a few slides about that, a little overview that's probably review and known by all of you, but it's useful for our for training. So first of all, WIOA the idea behind WIOA and kind of the unique new thing about it was that it was to bring together different systems of workforce development, education, and economic development to produce a single, comprehensive, high-quality workforce system, and this is listed as one of the goals of WIOA. And it brings together the different agencies as partners to work toward this end. And the key partners being the Department of Labor programs, with the Adult, Youth, and Dislocated Worker program, and the Youth Worker program, and the Wagner-Peiser. In adult ed, of course, it brings together our program and also voc rehab within education. And the idea, again, behind WIOA is for the state to coordinate these services and embody that in its state plan, either a unified or combined state plan. That's kind of the general idea. And the purposes then, in the end, this alignment then is to improve access to employment and support services with both education and training, improve basically employment opportunities for our students, our adults, our participants, and also to strengthen the programs for all of the different groups that fall into the WIOA umbrella, and in particularly focusing on adults and youth with barriers to employment or barriers to success. We'll briefly talk about that a little bit later, how that fits into WIOA. Now we bring this up to the performance accountability system. You can see that it's the indicators of performance that are embodied in WIOA, which we'll discuss in more detail, address these goals. Here basically are the employment indicators, the indicators of performance. You have MSG, measurable skill gain, which is a participant's progress toward achieving credential or employment. And then you have the indicators of after participation, which are obtaining a credential, secondary and both secondary and post-secondary, and employment and wages. So this is how the goals of the WIOA are embodied in the accountability system, by having these indicators that reflect that those overall long-term goals. And one thing that is embodied in WIOA through these indicators, which of course in adult ed we've done all along, but now it's explicitly in there, is that when you provide instruction and services, they have to be not just to improve literacy and instruction, but to a further a different endpoint, further endpoint, such as help the adult get a credential, help them get a job, and help them with improved wages. So, and as you see, the indicators are designed to reflect that and to address the next step, which you're providing the literacy for what purpose. Okay, so now the NRS, of course, is our way we implement in adult ed the WIOA goals, and they help us through the NRS. We support states in explaining and reporting the indicators, and help with database development and data collection. And one of the big things we do in WIOA and NRS is help with program improvement. A second here while I move to the next slide. Okay, so here's our indicators of performance, which we'll talk in more detail later. Of course, there's measurable skill gain, and that includes educational functioning level gains, which can be achieved in 3 ways by a participant: testing, entry into post-secondary education or earning credits, Carnegie credits for instruction, and getting a secondary credential. And of course, there's a credential attainment, which includes both secondary and post-secondary, and our 3 employment measures of second and fourth quarter employment and median earnings. The other thing about to do this within WIOA and to achieve the goals and for reporting and data collection and collecting these data, you have to have a database that supports these outcomes and these processes that allow you to report the indicators, allow you to track students, because the post-exit indicators are collected at various times after a student leaves, so you need identifiers and linkages, ideally linkages with employment and post-secondary databases, and you have the ability to track students after they leave, their employment and their credential attainment. And again, here we go, is within the NRS project, we strive to improve continuous improvement, both in the collection of data, to improve their data and reliability, and to use the data for program improvement. And through that, we have improved service delivery. So that's how we bring it all together through the NRS project. We want you to have these systems in place, and then we support them to improve data quality and collection, reporting, and use. So now I think I'm going to turn it to Ruth to give you an activity and discussion.
Yep. Thanks, Larry. So now we'd like to hear from you on a couple of questions, and we want you to think about it in terms of your perspective as project staff or state staff. So if you can take a couple minutes to respond to the following questions. So one is, how has the focus on employment and credentials affected local programs, programming, service delivery, and data collection? How have you seen the impact over the years as WIOA has been implemented? And the other question is, what have you done at the state level that has been particularly effective in helping local programs understand the goals of WIOA, so that we can learn some different strategies from you and from one another? Okay, if you can take a couple moments. So from Amy, she said it's made our intake process cumbersome, and they've lost some clients because of it. So maybe people have some recommendations on how they're doing intake that could help Amy have a more streamlined process, so it's not going to prevent people from engaging in the program. Programs are more aware of where their students go post-graduation. Okay, so they're sort of seeing what the impact of programming is and able to follow them. Many more IEP services are offered now. Okay, and what is, if someone wants to share what the impact is of the IEP, how that's a positive. Okay, Tennessee has had an increase of working with WIOA partners and being intentional in working on common intakes. That's great. The partnerships are so important, and it's good to hear them move, happening smoothly. And if people have suggestions for how you've had successful partnerships, please share. Employment data collection has improved a great deal. Okay. One problem, though, is Wyoming is a non-workforce courses aren't submitted to the National Student Clearinghouse. Okay. We have some other comments. Programs are making sure to gather correct contact information. That's great, so they can follow up more easily. Sometimes it doesn't reflect the growth of the students or the work of the program. That's interesting. So it's capturing other things that maybe not those things all the time. Combined goals are hard to meet. Would like credit for each step of the programming that's offered. Data collection on employment and credentials has increased importance of data sharing and data agreements. Great. So the end goal is employment. So every student begins orientation with setting goals and learning about what pathways will meet their needs. Okay, so really having a clear focus on how you're going to help your students through programming, what the end result is going to be. I'm going to move over to some of the great strategies that have been used. So actually working with folks during the site visits, so it's really clear that if things aren't reported, the programs can't get credit for them. In Pennsylvania, the state director has update webinars with where she provides the field with real information, NRS updates, and keeps state staff updated about what areas programs are struggling with, and she'll address them in more detail in upcoming webinars. Okay, so a lot of communication back and forth between the state office and the programs and within the state office. No worries, Christine, hard to type in the slide. Okay, so seminars to help understanding, that's great. And some of the things that we're providing today and in various other webinars and things, we hope you use our content and some of our materials as well in the different activities you do. So sharing state targets and establishing individual provider targets. Okay, so I'm guessing that means sharing amongst all the states so they're aware of what other states are doing. New data dashboards that include all of WIOA goals. Great. Lots of early technical assistance when WIOA was passed. Wonderful. So people in your programs have a good foundation how to keep things going. Okay, Data Tuesday. Okay, so it sounds like a lot of really regular messaging happening, keeping people on point with existing information, new information. That's great. So thank you so much for sharing these ideas. We're going to capture everything that maybe I didn't get to note right now, so you'll be able to see it on the recording. And I'm going to move forward here because we want to show you a couple other things. This is just an image of the activity packet, and then I just want to show you a couple examples of things that are in the activity packet. So we tried to mix it up and have some multiple choice, sort of, quiz-like things, and then also short answer opportunities, and then deeper discussions to really get into the analysis of some of the topics. So you see here the question, what measures do states have to report on through the NRS? You see what people's thinking are about it. We're going to give you an opportunity to answer here. And the majority of people are saying that performance indicators, descriptive measures, and participation indicators is what is measured and reported through the NRS. And that is absolutely correct. So that's wonderful to see. We're going to move ahead. We have this other question, which is in the packet, which is similar to what you just answered for us from the state perspective. And we did touch on what it is like for the locals as well, the local programs. But from their perspective, if they were answering this question, what impacts does the need to collect indicators of performance, including WIOA's focus on employment and credentials, have on their programming, service delivery, and data collection? So what are some things that may come out from the program perspective? So just a couple comments, then we'll move on to some more content. Okay, so create proven evidence-based system that can change as new information is entered. Okay, so do you think that's something that they're looking for, they're asking for, or something you feel like they're contributing to, Michelle? So if you can just expand on that a little bit. Well, that's great, Michael. You're mentioning that programs have been more active in working with local partners, so hopefully they see that as a positive and they feel like they're more integrated with other partners. Data validation has now become more crucial at the local level with multiple providers. implementing cross-checks and systems. Okay, so a lot of working together with other entities. And how do you think local programs are feeling about that? How does that impact their work and how they do their day-to-day? Okay, so here we have an answer. They would say there's too much to collect for part-time staff. Okay, so that's a realistic situation for a lot of programs. They don't have full-time employees. And increases the urgency to do referrals. Okay, so people feel, I guess, a focus, maybe a pressure to do the referrals. And there's a big focus on student outcomes. Okay, so maybe that's a clarity that they have that's helping them in providing their programming. Okay, great. So again, we're going to move ahead. Thank you for answering that. Kind of a little bit of a different angle on that question, and that's within the packet. I'm going to move ahead and hand it back to Larry.
Okay, thank you, Ruth, and thank you for your participation, everybody that commented. I'm going to move ahead now to talking about the key terms that you need for NRS reporting. We have some terminology that's very important as far as for understanding and data collection and reporting. So let me briefly talk about what those are. There are 7 of them that I'm going to cover right now, and you know, we have a whole language. If you ever try to talk about NRS or WIOA to someone that doesn't know it, they get very confused very easily. So here's the key 7 ones that you need to know. Participants and reportable individuals, periods of participation, what does it mean to exit, of course barriers to employment, and then we have 3 special programs or terms that we use for types of services we provide under WIOA: workplace education, IET, and IELCE, or integrated English literacy and civics education. So let me start with the participant. So we have what's known as a participant, kind of a technical term. We would often call them a student, I guess, in adult ed. But that's an individual who achieves 12 or more contact hours after entry. And that is to be distinguished from a reportable individual, who's an individual who takes an action to demonstrate intention to access services, but has fewer than 12 hours. So they might provide identifying information, they might use a self-service system, and they may only come for information. They come show up for your programs, maybe they come to an orientation or to some kind of a recruitment activity that your program may have, but they don't stay 12 hours or more. And so they showed an interest to attend adult ed, took some action, but they didn't actually stay long enough to be a participant. So that's only important because we have one reporting table for those reportable individuals. Participants then are everybody else, and the indicators apply to everybody else who achieves that, with the exception of the exclusions that we'll talk about in a minute. Now here's a new term that we started with WIOA that we never really used in adult ed before then, called a period of participation. You might think of that as an enrollment period. That's maybe a better term, but we use the more formal term used by the partners. And that period of participation is just begins when a participant, of course, who gets 12 hours, enters adult ed, and it's that time period that they're enrolled in the program. And of course, they have to have at least 12 hours. There may be more than one of those because participants can exit and come back in a program year. And when that occurs, it's a new period of participation, which has implications, which I'll talk about in a minute, for reporting and for tracking that individual. Now, a participant remains a participant once they get those 12 hours until they exit, and an exit is defined as basically your service ends, participant no longer receives services for 90 consecutive days, and they have no plan for resuming. So for example, if a student there's a semester break or term break, and of less than 90 days, or even more than 90 days really, if there's a break, like a summer break, the participant is intending to come back, that doesn't necessarily exit them. So it's 90 days with no services planned. And the exit date then is that date that the participant stops receiving services, but you have to wait, of course, 90 days to make sure that's true. So for example, if today was the last day of services, September 2nd, you'd have to wait until December 1st or so, I guess that's 90 days, and then you would then say that participant exited on September 2nd. You could formally say that. You need to know that, to know the end of the POP for reporting both the MSG and for the post-exit indicators for tracking. Then we have these demographic measures known as barriers to employment, and they are within WIOA itself defined, and they are factors that may inhibit or prevent or slow down a participant's ability to obtain employment, as they say. We use them for a number of reasons, both for the statistical model that we'll be using, that we won't be discussing here, but there is a model that helps you adjust that. It has us adjust performance based on the types of participants, and with the idea being that these participants may require additional or more intensive services, and that's the value of them from the provider level or the state level to identify these key populations identified within WIOA as being important to focus on that may require additional services, and for that reason there's a little adjustment that can be made in your performance indicators depending on the numbers that you serve. You collect these at intake and report them for each POP, but they're initially collected at the very first entry at intake. And here I just briefly, we have briefly listed them. I'm not going to go over them in any big deal. There's 11 of them, including displaced home workers, low-income participants, migrant and seasonal farm workers, single parents, and the long-term unemployed among the other 11 that are there. So your intake system at initial entry should include asking and collecting these barriers that may apply to an individual participant. Then as far as some few other services that we provide, one is, you may see this term in WIOA as workplace education, and these are literacy activities and workplace activities provided in collaboration with an employer or employer organization or offered in a location that is designed to improve productivity in the workforce. So that's combined with adult ed, and as I mentioned earlier, and the goals of WIOA are to kind of integrate adult ed into the workforce, and this is one way that it can be done. And of course, we are all familiar now with IET programs, integrated education and training programs, which are explicitly defined within WIOA as adult education and literacy activities offered concurrently and contextually with workplace activities or preparation activities and workforce training. They typically target a specific occupation or cluster of occupations, and they are designed to support your the regional or state workforce investment board plans and workforce development plans. And so those can be offered by under WIOA and for adult ed programs. And then finally, we have a program that was created under WIOA, which is Integrated English Literacy and Civics Education, IELCE. And these are services for English language learners and can include adults with advanced degrees and credentials. They focus on both providing English language instruction, workforce skills, and IET instruction within the program. And also civics education and citizenship can also be provided under IET. And there's a special funding mechanism provided for IET programs. Okay, and I just want to briefly mention distance ed. It's, as you all know, it's become a much bigger I presume, much bigger number of students than there were before, since I think a lot of states are becoming completely virtual for the time being. So distance ed is defined in adult ed under NRS as, you see the definition there, a formal learning activity that there's a separation and instructions provided, geographic separation and physical separation that can be provided, but instruction can be provided through computer software, much like we're doing here, printed materials, audio materials, or even broadcast. So that and that can be is an allowable activity. There's a state policy that you have for defining who distance learners are. They can be completely distance or hybrid, both combination. Instruction, as I say, is provided by these approaches: technology, software, telephone, etc., and mail. Okay, so Ruth, I think, is it Ruth or Marcella? Marcella's going to do this discussion with you. A quick discussion about that. Thank you, Marcella.
Thanks, Larry. So we wanted to hear from you. Which WIOA data concepts have posed the most challenges for local program staff? We think that there are probably some that you'll all have in common, but maybe have many challenges. So we're interested in which one are the most for you. Also, we're interested in finding out what effective strategies you've used to help the local staff understand these concepts. So I'll give you a moment to answer those questions. Oh, and I see a trend here. Okay, so far, let's see, almost everyone, okay, except for one, we have POPs seem to be quite a challenge. Okay, great. And I know that has been a long-standing challenge for many states in trying to roll out these concepts and this information to their local program. But we do have a vote for barriers to employment. I'm glad to hear that, TJ, that POPs have gotten easier for people to understand. So that's good. And now I just want to, let's see. It looks like some of the other things are also challenges. Surveying students with no social security numbers, that's always a challenge. Following up, post-exit indicators. Okay, so hopefully in looking at this list, as you scroll through, if nothing else, you'll feel better that you're not the only one dealing with challenges in conveying these concepts to your students. But so now I'm really interested to hear to read what strategies you've all been using to share this information, because again, it's not easy, and we understand that. So let's see, so webinars, one-on-one trainings, okay, webinars, all to the above, so webinars, PD sessions, one-on-one, user guides, great. Targeted PD that's both pre-planned and on request, webinars, monthly meetings, okay, all right, helping your students understand that they have different goals, all right, and charts and the LEAP trainings. Wow, I'm so excited, Sarah, to hear that you still find our older NRS trainings to be helpful for your teachers and for your local program staff. Webinars, PD sessions, okay, great. And I see Beth, you said that you do monthly webinars, so that's great that you keep coming back to it and reinforcing all of that important information. The training sessions regionally, use NRS support, group desk support. Okay, great. Mostly webinars. So I think, yeah, it sounds like webinars, especially, given the current situation of the country, for the most part, webinars seem to be a very convenient way to convey a lot of information. So I'm really excited to hear that you're all using that to convey these often challenging pieces of information. Okay, so we will, and office hours. Oh, okay. So again, I encourage you to come back to the recording and you can see what other people's strategies are that they've been using. But for now, we'll go on. All right, so again, in your NRS Basics activity packet, you'll find questions that will help you work through some of these things with your local programs. So we're not going to have you answer these questions now, but for example, you can have a multiple choice question, have them talk about what the role of the POP is. It's important because many of you identified that as a topic. Take a moment, see if you can answer that for yourself. And then similarly, a discussion question that you might want to talk to them about, we'll see here. And again, these are just ideas to help you start your local programs thinking about these, understanding it just a little bit better. So again, this is all in that activity packet that you can download in the files section. And let's see. Right, and Larry, I'm going to turn it back over to you to talk to us about the indicators of performance.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, and thank you for your participation, everybody. So now I'm going to talk in more detail about the definitions for indicators of performance. Of course, this is where we get most of our questions and our focus a lot of our TA on and a lot of our materials. So it's useful to, very useful to have this as a review and to understand them. So of course, the one that people know the most and are focused on a lot is measurable skill gain. Measurable skill gain, as you probably know, is it's our measure to determine whether a participant is making progress as they move through their adult ed career of obtaining basic skills and workplace skills to ultimately get improved employment and credential. So there's really two ways to do this, and within one way there's three different methods for doing it. Of course, there's EFL gain, I think the one that we're all most familiar with, which is through pre and post testing through the NRS levels, using the approved tests, giving a pre-test at entry and a post-test after time determined by the test publisher and the test characteristics. And if there's a increase as according to the EFL level definitions, that counts as a measurable skill gain. There's also basically credit for post-secondary level students through Carnegie units, moving from level 5 to level 6. If you have, for example, a adult high school where you have this type of service. And then just an enrollment in post-secondary education after exit. So a participant comes to your program, exits, and before the end of the year enters post-secondary or an occupational skills program, that can count as an MSG as well. Getting a high school credential is the second way to get an MSG. So if a participant comes in, gets their GED or HiSET or whatever test you have, or a recognized, state-recognized secondary credential, that can count also as an MSG. There are some additional ways that Title I uses to measure MSG. At the moment, adult ed does not follow all of those methods, but that may change in the future. I won't get into that now, but there are some other methods that right now we don't use, but that may change. So that's MSG. And then there are these other set of indicators, which we call the post-exit indicators, which are collected after a participant exits the program. And you collect these for each period of participation. So that's one of the reasons why you have to track entry and exit dates for participants so that you can know the appropriate indicator for the appropriate time period. They have a specific time period for when they're collected that I'll go over in a second. And there are a group of participants that are excluded from these for different reasons, typically because their instruction was interrupted, and I'll talk about those in a minute as well. But for many of the indicators, for the employment indicators that we'll talk about next, the second quarter employment, these are actually applied to all participants except for this excluded group that I'll talk about. So after the second quarter after exit, Basically, you have to determine, did the participant get a job anytime during that quarter? And if so, they are counted in the numerator. And as I said, that applies to everybody who exits the program, with the exception of excluded participants, and it has to be calculated and collected for each POP. So if a person has 2 POPs, for example, participant has 2 POPs, you have to, during the year, you have to collect this twice, this information twice. And the fourth quarter employment is similar, except it's just 2 quarters later. So again, it counts 4 quarters after participant exits. Were they employed at any time during that quarter? If so, yes, they're counted as a success here. And again, this is everybody who exited for each POP except for the excluded participants. Then for quarterly earnings, it's a little bit more complicated. This is really, unlike other indicators, it's not an indicator that applies to an individual person. It's an indicator for the entire group of exited participants. And it only applies to participants who were employed in the second quarter after exit. So once you identify who was employed in that second quarter indicator, you look at these participants, you get their earnings, median earnings, and then you make calculate the median for that group of participants. So that works pretty straightforward. Now, if you don't have access to the quarterly records through a data match, you can collect this information through other ways, and there is a program memoranda that describes these additional ways. But one way you may be doing that is through surveys. And then when you have a survey, you have to ask participants, how much money did you make in this particular quarter? And they may be unwilling to answer you. So there's a quirk in the requirements that if you report 0, you can't count that person as employed. But if in the survey you know that the person was employed and they're only just refusing to answer because of privacy concerns or they just don't want to tell you their income, you can put $1 in there. So that way you can count the person as achieving a second quarter employment and they won't be excluded. Because if you do a data match and it comes back 0, that person is considered not employed. But with a survey, if you know the person says, yeah, I have a job, and you can, but I don't want to tell you my wages, you can put $1 in there so that you can count them. So that's a technicality that we built in to help alleviate privacy concerns and stop the ability so that you could still report unemployment without getting that information. Okay, and here's a chart. Let's see, will it work here? Yeah, that shows you that. So here is the group of, here let's say hypothetically are like, what, 7 participants. Here's what they made in the quarter. You rank order them, and you'll have a computer program hopefully to do this for you, by lowest to highest, and then you will find the one that's the median, the one in the middle. And for this group of 7 participants, the median that you would report is $2,548. Okay, then we have an indicator that's a little complicated, and this is the credential attainment. It's complicated for 2 reasons. First of all, it includes 2 credentials, both secondary and post-secondary, and they are different participants that you would put in that group. And also there's another caveat in there, another requirement that participants getting the secondary credential have to have some employment or entry into post-secondary requirements. So it includes both indicators. So if a student gets either one of these indicators, you can count that, and you count it only once. So if they happen to get both, you only count it once, either while they're enrolled or within a year of exit, and you report it after exit. However, if they said, oh yeah, I got a secondary credential, you have to then wait or follow them up for up to a year to see did they also enroll in post-secondary education or were they employed after exit. So, and then you can, only then can you count that credential for the secondary credential. You got 2 credentials, 2 different groups of participants, counted only once, and if it's a secondary credential, they have to also either be employed or enter post-secondary education. Okay, so then who do you count for these credentials? For the secondary credential, you're only counting those who did not have a high school equivalency when they entered, and they received instruction at the 9th grade or above. And either that can be at entry or they could advance during their enrollment. So they may have started, let's say, at a lower level, but they then moved up to a 9th grade or higher. And that's a decision by the state how to define that type of instruction. But generally, it's going to be 9th grade instruction or higher instruction and didn't have a secondary credential. And of course, they have to exit to be counted. As for the post-secondary credential, who do you count here? These are participants who are co-enrolled in both post-secondary education and adult ed, and this could be something like IET, for example, and they have to have exited from the post-secondary education or training. And then those participants are the ones that you would track to see did they achieve their credential. And here's a chart that basically shows in one, oops, sorry about that, handy chart. So again, it just summarizes what I just said. In your numerator, which is did they get a secondary credential or a post-secondary credential within 1 year and exit or while they were enrolled, that goes in the numerator. And again, it's only counted one time. So if somebody who's got 2, you only pick one and you count them. And there's are the 2 different pools you use. Exited participants who entered without a secondary credential, were enrolled in secondary level, and then were and those that exited and were co-enrolled in adult ed and post-secondary education and exited post-secondary education. And then for the secondary credential, they also, those that got the secondary credential have to get, to be counted in the numerator, have to get a job or be employed rather, and enter post-secondary ed. That's a complicated indicator. So I made one more slide to sort of demonstrate who goes into that credential indicator, or basically all the indicators, but specifically I wanted to highlight the credential indicator. So, so you're not usually worried about it, whether they got a credential or not. You can usually obtain that information, but the questions we often get are who did we count there? So we start off with everybody who exited for each POP, and that's what this blue box is, excluding the participants, the excluded participants, which I'll talk about in a minute. So this is everyone who exited for each POP accepted the exclusion. And so what you'd want to get include with them from this pool is their exit date and the demographic data you need, the barriers to employment, because you have to report that as well. And for everybody, as I mentioned, everyone you collect the secondary quarter employment indicator, second quarter employment indicator, and 4th quarter employment indicator. So basically everybody except the excluded are for this indicator. Within this group, as I mentioned, those that were employed in the 2nd quarter would be included in the median earnings credential. You got your whole group, everyone you collect that indicator on, you include them in that denominator, and you collect that indicator on. Of this, those that got a job in the 2nd quarter, in the blue box, is who you would, that's your pool, and then you get the median earnings from that group. As far as the credential indicators, again, here's our 2 cohorts that you include in the pool. They received post-secondary level instruction and entered without a high school diploma, and entered and received were employed, or rather, I'm sorry, just the pool is simply they were in secondary level instruction and didn't have a high school diploma at entry, and the post-secondary are those who are co-enrolled in adult ed and secondary ed and exited post-secondary ed. And that's the pool. Then from those participants, you collect the indicator, credential indicator. So again, the green here are the indicators, and the blue are your denominators. So it's a different way of showing you. I'll go back to the previous slide. This slide. This is just a more broken out way of showing that slide and what I just described. It has everything in one spot. Okay? Okay, so you can see why that's the most complicated indicator. All right, so I've been mentioning exclusions, and I've never defined them, but here they are. So you can exclude, or you should exclude these participants from all the performance indicators if they meet these conditions, which they exited because they got incarcerated or entered a 24-hour support facility such as a hospital or treatment center for medical treatment. Participant is deceased, or if they were called into active duty or armed services for at least 90 days. So these are the exclusions. So any participant that falls into these categories, you exclude them. You don't have to report performance indicators. You don't have to follow up. Did they get a job, for example, or get a credential? You wouldn't expect them to have that ability to do so. And those are noted in WIOA. Okay, so that's a very quick review of the indicators. And now I'm going to have a discussion that Ruth will lead. Ruth?
Thanks, Larry. Yep. So next we have another opportunity for you to share some information with us, which will help us also as we come up with other activities and guidance and guides and courses and things like that for you. So the first question that you'll see is, what questions do local programs ask most frequently about the indicators, and what kinds of challenges are you seeing that they're having in understanding the indicators, what they mean, and how to collect data around the indicators? And then if you can share with us strategies that you've been using that are effective in helping them understand and collect data. And we know that you are using all of these methods, the webinars, one-on-one consultations, and user guides, et cetera. So if you can provide for us maybe some specific things that you have done, describe an activity or something that you have done, that would be helpful. And actually, Marcella, if you could look at the chat responses and read them out. I am having some connectivity issues.
Oh, sure, no problem.
Thanks, sorry about that.
Yeah, no problem. So it seems like Latoya is having a similar problem to what you were mentioning, Larry, earlier, that a lot of people have about who's included in the indicators. And so I'm glad we were able to provide a clear way of explaining that. And so they understand the indicators, but they're not quite sure about how to collect data from students with changing phone numbers and addresses, and that's always an issue. That it's much harder to follow up if we don't have that information. So they struggle with credential indicator, understanding who's the numerator. They ask about the difference between the secondary credential as an MSG versus as an indicator. There's some concerns that a participant with an SSD high school equivalency or HSE doesn't count. Okay. So I think that you're bringing up some fairly common issues. And so we're not seeing as much action in the strategies chat, which suggests that maybe we haven't all figured out how to address some of these strategies. Diane shared that in Wyoming, local programs are required to data match quarterly with their local community colleges for non-credit workforce-based credentials earned by participants. And this is in addition to the data match. Okay, great. And that said that monthly they have webinars designed around data collection and the NRS. Okay. Let's see. Some more questions. ELLs don't want to give social security numbers or information on where they're working, right? So that privacy thing that we were talking about before. Data collection is difficult all around, coming and going. Yep. trying to figure out when things start and end, transitional students. Michelle said one-on-one is one of the strategies that she's been using. Sarah said switching to a more comprehensive data system has increased the ability to see when follow-up surveys are due, but they still struggle with getting them done and tracking down students. Okay. All right, I think with that, I'll give you one more second so that we have this information that we can collect. Ronnie shared that a common question is adequately reporting those that attend private school or go to another state. Yeah, without a way to data match those necessarily, that can be a challenge. Marie said we do desk reviews, which include our LACES system in place to track the data, track this information. Wyoming is developing an online survey form. That's great. All right, well, hopefully you've seen some strategies that might be helpful or got you thinking about some things that you might want to try out. And we will, again, these will be available in the recording if you want to come back and check those out again a little bit later. And I see Ruth is calling in, so I'll give her 1 second to join us. Well, we share that in South Dakota, they centralize the data maps for all employment and credential indicators. That's great. And Ruth can see that, so I'm going to turn it back over to you, Ruth.
Great. Thanks, Marcella. Sorry about that. I was able to get back online. I'm happy about that. Okay, so again, this is just to show you what the packet looks like. Here's another discussion question that is in your packet. So it asks programs how to think about how to report on a student given her particular demographics and designations and participation rate. So we would ask the programs to think about what elements of this question are important and what the answer is. So if you want to just, if someone wants to just put a couple of the things that are important about the question in the chat box, that's great. And then I can just provide. So just in our regular chat box.
Sorry, Ruth, I think we lost you for a second. Not sure what you were asking people to write in the chat. Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay, just if people had like a couple thoughts about what in particular in this question, you know, you would attend to, you would want programs to attend to when they're looking at this particular person. A participant is a National Guard member. She attends your program for 60 hours. It's called 5 months of active duty before she post-test. Explain how you would report this particular participant in your data. So a couple things people would pay attention to are that okay, so I see some people's comments are coming in. Okay, I'm not seeing them come in. So, you know, one thing would be that it's a National Guard member, so that falls in with, you know, some of the exceptions. You'd look for how long they're away. So the answer to this question is if she exits the program because she's a member of the National Guard or other reserve military unit of the Armed Forces and is called to active duty for at least 90 days, she can be excluded from the WIOA primary indicators of performance. Okay, so this was just an example question. I'm going to turn it back to Larry.
Okay, terrific. Now I've talked about WIOA and the basis for our indicators and how they support the WIOA goals of improved employment and additional educational opportunities. And then we talked about some of the key terms that are needed to understand WIOA accountability and in the NRS. We talked about the indicators. And now I'm going to conclude with talking about some additional factors that are important for understanding data collection and reporting. So let's first go back to our favorite topic, which is periods of participation, MSGs and POPs. Of course, you might have a student that achieves more than one gain during a period of participation. Maybe they get 2 EFL gains, for example. Well, in WIOA, you can only count that participant one time, one MSG. So if you get both and you should count the last one achieved. So here's my example. I have a participant who got an EFL gain and then later on got their HSE credential. You would only count them as getting an HSE one time. So they only get one per POP. Now, since it's hard to know if, say, a person has more than one POPs, did that learning occur in one particular period that helped them get an HSE, or was it multiple? So since we can't tell that, we allow you to apply that to all the POPs. And the same thing with post-secondary entry. So if a participant exits with an MSG gain in the first POP and returns for a second POP, and achieves an HSC, that HSC counts in both POPs. So it would more typically be the case that a participant came, they may have left before they were post-tested, or they didn't achieve a gain, they came back and then they got their HSC. You can count that as 2 MSGs, one for each POP. And that's also true if a person entered post-secondary according to the rules of post-secondary entry of exiting and entering before the end of the reporting period, or program year rather. So then, so in other words, 1 MSG per POP. If it's an HSE or a entry into post-secondary, that achievement can be counted for both POPs, or all the POPs if there's more than 2. And I want to bring this one up because I've had a lot of questions lately for obvious reasons that there are now a lot more students in distance learning, and there's a issue that you can't assess them in person. So there's a different way. How do we count MSGs? I want to mention 2 things. First of all, there are, as I mentioned in the beginning of this presentation, several ways of achieving MSG. So all of those can also apply to distance learning participants, pre and post testing, credit completion, entry into post-secondary education after exit. We are now permitting virtual assessment of post-testing. So if your state, if you have the ability to use a virtual assessment, and I know some of the approved NRS test publishers are working on that and are various states of progress on it. If your state has that ability, you can use that virtual testing approach to determine EFL gain. And of course, the test must be an approved NRS test. So if you're using approved CASAS test or CAPE test, and it's allowed to be administered virtually in your state, you can use that results of that test to measure EFL gain and report MSG. Now, the other complicated factor then, and we kind of went over this a little bit, and I'm going to revisit it now again, is your time for collecting the post-exit indicators. And they differ, and they're on different tables. Table 5 is different than all the other tables. It's the table that report post-exit indicators. For employment indicators, they're based on the exit quarter, as we said, the second and fourth quarter employment. And the reporting is different. I'm going to show you that in a minute. So you report, of course, for every other table, participants who came between July 1st and June 30th of the program year. For these indicators, the post-exit indicators, they're in different time periods. So your employment indicators are actually reported for the prior program year. So they wouldn't be reported for this year, for example, for the 1920 year. They would be participants who exited in the 1819 year. So you collect them on an ongoing basis based on their enrollment, but you report them a year for the year previously. And I'll show you this in a minute in another slide. The same thing for the credential and fourth quarter employment. These are even a little bit more complicated because of the long time lag that you have to wait after, for example, after exit, after getting a person exits, let's say a credential program, a post-secondary credential program, you would have to wait up to a year to see if that participant got a credential. So because of that time lag that you have to wait, they're reported in even a longer time period, which can be up to 2 years after when they exited. And the calendar is based on a January-December year, not a program year, and it includes parts of 2 program years. So I know this is confusing, so maybe it's best shown by this chart. So if you need to explain this, or you want to understand it yourself, or explain it to people learning the NRS, this is, I think, a useful chart that I made for this particular reporting period for your data that's due on October 1 to Octave. For your second quarter and median earnings participants, you'll actually be reporting those for participants who exited in the previous program year, July 1, 2018 through June 30, 2019. So that's when those participants are reported on Table 5 for those indicators actually attended in the previous year. For fourth quarter and credential employment, they will be for participants who exited between January 1st, 2018 and December 31st, 2018, so which are essentially the last 2 quarters of PY17 and the first 2 quarters of PY18 to make a calendar year. Now, I could go on about why that is and show you different ways, but this table, I think, will explain it, and if you want further information, I can certainly provide it to you. But given the time and the complexity of it, I'm just going to show you that table and let you contemplate it. And it is complicated. It took us a while to work that out. Okay, so then there are great challenges, as you're aware of, and as I saw in some of the chat we just did, to collecting the achievement method after the participant exits. Of course, the student's gone, and it's some time period passes, a quarter or up to a year. So how do you collect these data and know to find out if the student achieved a credential and what their employment status and perhaps their median earnings are, quarterly earnings. Of course, data matching is the best way to do this, in that it will be much more efficient and less time-consuming once you get those data matching agreements. And I know great majority of states do this. You just have to run your data match for the appropriate quarter for the appropriate cohort, which is why in an earlier slide I mentioned you have to have the exit date and also the barriers to employment, because when you report it, you must also report the barriers to employment data for the participants and their achievements. And of course, you must collect them for each POP and tie it to demographics. For the credential attainment, that's a lot more difficult in that there is no single data source. There's not an employment. There's an employment database that your state has, the unemployment insurance database, or other databases with employment data, but there's no single database for the credentials. So that's a little tricky. But again, if you can develop some matching agreements with some agencies, maybe your key community colleges or your agency that awards the high school equivalency diplomas, that will help you. You can collect that while the participant's enrolled or up to 1 year later. And again, that is tied to each POP, and you should include the demographics for reporting. You must include those for the state performance report that your state submits each year. There are other methods allowable for collecting these data besides data match, and you often have to supplement them for not having Social Security numbers, or not having data matching agreements, or not having full coverage, for example, in the credential employment. Just most common way is through surveys. You have to do the survey. You have to follow the same rules about the timelines of quarters and up to a year. Of course, you can use a phone, but these days I think online methods work much better. There's a whole, I'll talk at the end about resources we have to help you figure out ways to do that. And then there is a program memorandum put out by Octave several years ago about supplemental methods, and particularly for the employment and earnings. And here's a list of some of the allowable methods for doing that, such as getting tax payments, pay stubs, letters from employers, notes verified by the employer. If you have a relationship with One Stops, they may have them, or if the participant is self-employed, collecting that information from the participant directly. And as I said, there's many resources I'll talk about that you can use for that. Post-secondary databases, we've identified some of the key ones that you might use to get post-secondary credentials. A good start is just to find the colleges in your communities where students may typically go, have relations there. If your double data is also in the community college system, I've found in states that have that situation, they have an easier time for collecting these data and integrating these databases. But here's some external ones that you can use, such as the National Student Clearinghouse. I know that's a very popular one. Okay, so that's the end of that presentation. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Ruth.
Okay, great.
Activity?
Yeah, so actually, for the sake of time, because we do want Larry to be able to answer some of your questions at the end, we're going to, instead of doing breakouts, we're going to look at these questions all together, and if you can put some of your comments in the chat box, that would be great. So we've got these 4 areas that have been recent challenges for programs and states, so collecting Social Security numbers, barriers to employment, using surveys and other supplemental data, and assessment testing in distance education. So if there is a particular area that you have experienced challenges, if you can think of, you can maybe describe it a little bit in the chat, and then if other people can offer some strategies that have maybe worked for them. So why don't we start out, we can just discuss collecting Social Security numbers first, and then we can go down the list. Just got a couple comments and strategies. Oh, great. Marcella has put up a chat pod for us. That's wonderful.
There we go.
Okay, and if Social Security number is not something that you're struggling with, or somebody else doesn't have a strategy, we could look at the barriers to employment. And Marcella is breaking them out on the chat pod, so you can put your comments just below the headings that she's providing. So I'm thinking probably assessment testing for distance education. People might have concerns, questions about that. So especially, you know, during these times where everybody is remote. So just give it a couple more minutes, because we do want to get to some of your other questions. Okay. So people are putting it in the other chat, I think. Okay. Thanks. Okay. So Social Security numbers, providers don't want to collect them, and participants don't want to share. And yeah, so we have heard that before, that it also can be something people have privacy concerns about. Teachers not wanting to follow up on getting the Social Security numbers, that it can be awkward conversations. Okay. What strategies have people used? And then also, if you want to maybe talk about using surveys or other supplemental data, does anyone have any suggestions or things that have worked well for you, or supplemental data sources that have been useful, or any successful surveys? Okay, so if the student is co-enrolled with Workforce Services, we can get the Social Security number as long as the student has signed a release form. Okay, so I don't know how many people are using release forms. That's a good idea. Using something other than Social Security numbers. Yep, there are ways to do that. Larry can talk about that. We have encouraged one-on-one conversations about data. Great. So surveys can be hard with transient populations, even using online methods. So constant reminders to participants that they'll be contacted after, and creating guidance about finding low-hanging fruit. So when the participant has a new POP and is re-enrolled, great. So, you know, keeping the message out there, constant reminders. Okay. Okay. So we're going to move ahead because I want to be able to get your questions answered and share some additional information that we have. So the comments that have come in that we aren't getting to right now, they will be captured. So we'll move on, and we'll be able to address those in other ways for you post-webinar. Okay. Okay. So we have questions already in the chat box that were posted as the webinar was going on, and Marcella is going to share some of those, capture those for Larry so he can respond.
Yeah, can you hear me? I was having some trouble with my audio before, but it looks like it's working now, so that's great. So Larry, one of the questions we had was, if a student enrolls in the fall semester, does not exit, and continues to take classes in spring, how many POPs does that student have for the given fiscal or program year?
Okay, well, as we said, you don't. A POP doesn't end until there's an exit, and an exit is 90 days without any consecutive days without service, and no services planned. So in the case you said, if that did not occur, then there's only one POP. So a POP could go on for years, theoretically, if the participant kept re-enrolling and coming back and planning to come back and not being gone for 90 days. So it only ends when there is an exit. And so it can cross program years, for example.
Great. Another question we received is, are we required to maintain documentation to verify participant barriers, or do we accept the word of the participant?
There is no federal requirement to have any documentation. Your state may have a requirement, which if it does, then of course you need to comply with that. But there is no federal requirement. We just, it's self-reported, much like I think basically all the demographic data are self-reported for the federal, on the federal side, there's no requirement.
Okay, great. Let's see, another question we received is, are there criteria, aside from the definition of recognized post-secondary credential in WIOA, that determine what can be reported for post-secondary credentials?
Yes, there is a program memorandum that describes what the credentials can be. I don't know if it's a completely exhaustive list, but I don't remember which specific one is. I know Alan's listening. He might want to type it in or chime in. But there is a document that describes that. And whoever asked that, if you let me know, we'll find it for you, or Alan can just type it in right now. I don't know if he knows it off the top of his head either, but he's pretty good with that stuff. But yes, there is a definition. There is a list or some guidance, but it's not completely exhaustive, but it has some guidance about it.
Great. Thanks for answering that one, Larry. Another question, must the high school equivalency be either U.S. or non-U.S. based equivalency or just U.S. based equivalency? And this is in connection with the secondary credential attainment discussion.
Yeah, you would accept if a participant, let's say, gets what we would consider a high school equivalency, what they consider in their country, that you can count that as they have a high school equivalency.
Okay.
So it can be a foreign credential as well.
And there is a question about, which is very relevant to now, when you're talking about exclusion, does that include any healthcare workers during COVID-19?
Healthcare workers excluded from the performance indicators? No, it does not.
Okay, great.
So if there's a healthcare worker in your class and they had to go to, no, they're not in the exclusion list, no.
Okay, great. And it looks like one last question we had recently from Nancy. Said, I'm not sure I follow what Larry said about HSE or post-secondary being able to count in more than one POP. Could you explain that a little bit?
Oh, if a participant, let's say a participant gets a high school equivalency and then they go on and get a post-secondary credential, for WIOA reporting, you can only count one of those. It's a little more complicated than I said. In Table 5, you would report both of those. But for the calculation of your state performance indicator, only one of those will count and can count. And Table 5 has that. If you follow the instructions in Table 5, you'll see how to report that. So it only one credential counts per POP per participant for the WIOA calculation. So basically your credential rate of your state. But you do report it in the Table 5.
Great. And John wanted confirmation that if we count a non-U.S. High school diploma, those students will automatically populate those credential indicators on Table NRS Table 5. Is that correct?
Well, only for the credential indicator, only if they're also co-enrolled in a post-secondary program. So that credential, or you're talking about the secondary credential. So they wouldn't apply to that Table 5. So if they have a high school equivalency, they don't apply to the secondary credential indicator. If that student enrolls, however, if that student enrolls in post-secondary, then you would count them for a post-secondary credential. So you don't count them in Table 5 for the secondary credential if they already have at entry a high school equivalency. They do not count in that table.
Nancy wanted just one more bit of clarification about her question from earlier. She said, what about Table 4? She thought that you could count multiple POPs on Table 4.
There is a table that where you can count multiple EFL gains. You report for other additional POPs, you just put that number in, the number of, no, but you only count one per POP. So the first part of Table 4 is for the first enrollment, and then the last columns are for the subsequent POPs where you just indicate whether a second, but you only count one per POP because, yeah, you only count one. There is a table for additional EFLs that you can count. A new table, Table 4A or B, I forget, where you can count all the EFL games.
All right, great. Thanks, Larry, for answering those. And I know that people might still be thinking and have more questions that they want to ask, but I know that we wanted to talk a little bit about other supports that we have available. So I'm going to turn it back over to Ruth to wrap that up for us.
Thanks. Okay, so we just want to bring to everyone's attention that we hope you will check out the nrsweb.org. Has so many great resources, guides, online courses, the recorded webinars, and more. The NRS TA guide, which covers all the accountability requirements. And we have other specific guides, such as Demonstrating Success, TA guide for collecting post-exit indicators, a tips and suggestions toolkit on barriers to employment. And we have a new course, the NRS Basics online course, Measuring Performance Under WIOA, which is a great new resource for you, for new staff coming on, for people that need some reminders, refreshers. So we hope you will check that out. And then I also wanted to bring to your attention that we have the regional training coming up. So it's a virtual training this year. We're really excited about it. We've been able to translate a lot of the in-person approaches that we've used into the online environment, and we think you'll have a really good time. The training is September 21st through 24th for one session, and then for another group of participants, September 28th through October 1st. So with that, we're at our 2:30 mark. So we just want to thank all of you for participating, and we look forward to seeing you at the regional training later this month. And please fill out the evaluation. You'll see that it'll be at the bottom on the right. You can click on it where it says Web Links 2. Click on that for the evaluation, and it will pop up when we close out the room.
Thanks so much, everyone, for participating. We'll see you